My name is Lisa Morton. I am a writer of both fiction and nonfiction, and I have somehow become one of the world's leading authorities on the history of Halloween. I did not plan on it. I fell into it by accident when a publisher talked to me about doing another book and then said, "Is there anything else you'd like to do?" And I looked at a catalog of books they had published recently, and they had just done something called the Christmas Encyclopedia. So, almost off the top of my head, I said, "Hey, how about a Halloween encyclopedia?" And that was about 20 years ago, and it has just kept going since. If it was not an obsession when I started, it has certainly become one. I've written 3 books on the history of the Halloween of the holiday now, and also a lot of Halloween fiction. It is fun. As you can see, this is my office. I have a wall of Halloween art behind me, so I am just living my best Halloween life. I call it the most misunderstood holiday. It's like we all kind of know what Christmas is. We know the meaning of the name New Year's. We don't even know, most of us, what Halloween means. It is derived from the word hallow, which is an old word for saints. November 1st is All Saints' Day in the Catholic Church, and that's part of the history of the holiday. The other part is an ancient Celtic holiday called Samhain, and that, by the way, is spelled Samhain. It looks like Samhain. It's pronounced Samhain. It was celebrated at the end of what we now know as October by the Irish Celts. It was their New Year's. And so because of that, they thought it was a day of borders, of that border between years, between seasons. They were moving into their very cold winter and bringing their livestock in. And they also thought it was a day when the border between worlds could collapse and things could cross over from their other world. And those things were really scary. They call them the She, and that's where we get things like the Banshee from. These were very malicious. Now we would call them fairies, but they were far from Tinkerbell. They would come over into our world and bring corpses to life, burn down palaces, kidnap humans and take them back to their world. And that spooky side, for me, is where we get the sort of more macabre side of Halloween. I don't see a lot of scary stuff in a celebration of saints, frankly. So I think that's probably the great grandma of Halloween is Samhain. And from there, it just goes on through the centuries as the two kind of converge. It continues to be celebrated mainly in Scotland and Ireland for a long, long time. It was not celebrated in the UK so much, or rather in England or in America, until the 1840s, when the Scottish and Irish come here. And they bring this holiday that they love with them. And it was a day for them of playing pranks and of parties and of telling ghost stories and playing little fortune telling games. And that caught on in America. It became very popular by the end of the 19th century. But it was mainly a day of playing pranks. Kids loved to go out and like tip outhouses and carve big spooky faces into these pumpkins and set them by a dark place where it might shock somebody. And that leads us to trick or treat, because what happens is by the 1930s, these kids have moved into the cities. And it's no longer fun, innocent prank playing. Now they are causing millions of dollars of destruction. They're smashing windows and light fixtures. They're setting fires. And so a lot of cities are trying to figure out how to control this. And they come up with the idea of giving these kids these little parties. And those parties morph into trick or treat. And there again, trick or treat is another one of those sort of misunderstood parts of the holiday, because I hear a lot that it goes back centuries, that, or even that the ancient Druids practiced it. No, it's less than 100 years old, and it is American in origin. And it was instituted as a way to buy off kids. Well, I've always loved history anyway, so I think understanding history is always essential. In the case of Halloween, there are all of these misconceptions of it, and one of my tasks as a historian of this holiday was to try and lay some of those to rest. There is another one which can be particularly pernicious sometimes, which is this idea that it's a satanic holiday, that it's based on the worship of an ancient lord of death. That has a very specific moment in history, which is interesting, that we can pinpoint where that went wrong, and that is in the 18th century. There was a gentleman named Charles Vallancey, who was a British surveyor who was sent to Ireland to map the country. He became obsessed with that Celtic lore, but he just deliberately misinterpreted everything. He put out 6 volumes of his wild misinterpretations, and he was completely denounced by every other historian of the day. Some of the insults that were hurled at him are actually really funny. But those books found their way into libraries all over the world, and his books actually do state right there that Samhain is derived from the name of an Indian lord of death, and somehow he extends that to so that the ancient Celts spent this day worshiping a lord of death. And so that is what I call the strange alternate history of Halloween. The only other interesting development, I think, in Halloween over the last 30 years or so has been the rise in popularity of haunted attractions. That's become just such a key element of the celebration of Halloween now, and that has really just grown gigantically in popularity. And what I love when we talk about haunted attractions is that it's kind of twofold. Because on the one hand, we have the big professional haunted attractions now, of which there are hundreds and hundreds around the US, and they are extraordinary. But on the other hand, we have the home haunters. And the rise of things like Spirit Halloween stores and even Home Depot carrying these audio animatronic figures that are extraordinary has resulted in these amazing home displays, which now in some cases rival the professional haunts. That's really been interesting to watch. In the past, a home Halloween display would be, maybe a dozen pumpkins and a scarecrow and some hay bales and some corn stalks, and now it's like you can walk up and get your candy from an audio animatronic Freddy Krueger or something. It's really amazing. And of course, the professional haunted attractions are astonishing. And one of the things I love watching every year is the new technologies that come into play in those, with these things now going virtual and making more and more use of Hollywood level special effects. So that would be my only other thing. It's also interesting that haunted attractions have shifted the emphasis of the holiday much more onto adults. So it has become now, we still have trick or treat for the kids, although that's become very regionalized, which is interesting. It's now these little pockets of like affluent neighborhoods, it seems like, that people drive their kids into. Although there are still plenty of places doing it the old-fashioned way. And then the adults now have haunted attractions and bigger parties, masquerade balls, that kind of thing. I can be found at lisamorton.com. You can find from there my links to my Instagram and my Facebook. And over at Instagram, I have been doing a 61 Days of Halloween series in which every day I post one of my favorite vintage images and a little bit of history. So find me over there. Lisa Morton in LA is my Instagram tag.